Hello, everyone. I must welcome you all to the webinar series, Future You, Set Your Career Compass Right with Experts Insight. And this is your host, Kalyani. So today our topic is Build a Career in Brand Management. And in this webinar, you'll find out all about the career progression of the speaker who has joined us today, entry level to senior level, what's the career progression, nuances of brand management in different industries, is it industry agnostic or not, a typical day in the life of a brand manager, tips for MBA aspirants to excel in this field, and more. So to answer all this and more, we have our speaker, Dhruba Chatterjee. He's a senior director marketing at Viacom 18. He's an alumnus of IIFT Delhi. Prior to his job at Viacom 18, Dhruba has worked with Disney Star as a brand manager within the sports business. And apart from the media industry, he has extensive experience in the FMCG industry in sales and marketing, as well as in brand management at ITC Limited. So welcome, Dhruba Chatterjee, and thank you so much for being here today for this session.
Hi, Kalyani. Pleasure.
Yeah, so let's start from your career trajectory. So from IIFT to ITC, and then your current stint at Viacom 18. So if you could also tell us, like, what was the trigger for marketing, for getting into marketing, and was it the IIFT, was it the MBA that triggered, or was it something that you always had a plan for?
Prior to my MBA, I'm an engineer. I think a lot of aspirants are engineers.
Most of them.
Yeah. So after my engineering, I worked in the IT industry for a couple of years. Okay. And I was somehow not very excited by it. I thought that the kind of aspirations that I have, or the kind of things that excite me or interest me, this is probably not the field for me. And that's when I think I started thinking about an MBA. I think in my head, at least, I was very clear that sales and marketing is something I'm more interested in midnight towards. So even when I was appearing for my B school exams, so I was going for my MBA, I was pretty clear that if I make it, I would try to make the switch to sales and marketing. I was looking at an MBA to switch, to make that switch in professions. So I think in that sense, I was pretty clear even before I joined IIFT. I think for me, that was the primary reason to go for an MBA. Thankfully, once I did make it to IIFT, I got enough opportunities. I did my internship at Britannia, and then eventually got through to ITC from campus. So it was good. That was great. And at ITC, I mean, see, like in most FMCG companies, I would say most S&M companies, you will have a management stint program, and typically you start your career in sales. I'm not saying that's always going to happen. There are batchmates, there are friends who also started directly in brands, but more often than not, you will start in sales. So that happened with me as well. I worked in UP for a year as a management trainee. Then I was in Bihar for a couple of years doing my sales, and then I moved to marketing. And then in ITC, I was handling a brand called UP Noodles. That was at the entry level of a brand as an assistant brand manager. Worked there for 3 years. And then Disney Star happened. And I think, again, it just happened at a time when I was just having thoughts. I've spent about 6.5 years in this organization, and I think the opportunity in Disney Star was within the sports vertical, which I'm very passionate about. So I thought, okay, let me give it a shot, and that's how I made the move to Disney Star. And more recently, now that I've moved to Viacom, the business remains the same. I'm still very much within the sports business. It's just that Viacom is is setting up the sports business in India. So I thought with about 8.5 years of experience behind me, it's a good time to work somewhere where you're able to probably build things from scratch, set up systems and processes, great for your own learning, and also gives you a lot of satisfaction. So that's why I've made this move very, very recent. So let's see how it goes.
But tell me something about, so in the FMCG industry also, you worked in brand management and in the media industry as well. And so if you can just tell us, what's the difference as a brand management within brand management, as in the function? Does it change from industry to industry, or is it pretty much the same? And if you can also tell us the same, just not for FMCG and media industry, but also for e-commerce and other industries too. So yeah, if you could just tell us the difference.
See, I believe that there are certain fundamentals that will remain the same,
Okay.
irrespective of which industry you're working for. I think
Okay.
at the end of the day, if I have to put very simply, the role of a brand manager is about being a good project manager, because you will be interacting with many functions within the company, and the
Right.
brand manager's role is expected to make sure that the project timelines are moving properly. When you're working in the FMCG industry, the stakeholders could be the manufacturing guys, the packaging guys, the sales team, etc. When you're working in the media industry, the stakeholders probably change and interacting with the content team. I mean, again, interacting with the sales guys and all that. So I think certain fundamentals remain the same. Similarly, I think a big part of any brand manager's job is media planning. And
Yeah.
again, the fundamentals of that will not change. When I was working on UP Noodles as a brand manager, I would, for example, be trying to reach out to mothers and kids because that was my TG, that was my target group.
Okay.
Whereas when I'm working in sports business, your TG completely changes. It could be a much larger audience or it could be the males. But the process of media planning will still remain the same. So I think a lot of fundamentals remain the same.
Okay.
But yes, of course, as you move from industry to industry, there will be certain changes. I think probably use the cliched 4 Ps model. I think depending on the industry, certain Ps may become more important than the others. For example, I think in the FMCG industry, you have a great control on all the 4 Ps, which is the product, the pricing, the distribution, which is the place and the promotion. Whereas I think when you're working in sports or content, sometimes you cannot change the product much, right? I mean, if, for example, if a cricket match is happening and the cricket match starts, you can't predict if the team is going to lose 3 wickets in the first over, you're going to have 3 sixes in the first over, right? So you can't control the product, but what you can control is the promotion, the pricing to a certain extent. So I think there will be certain nuances or changes that will happen. Again, since you wanted me to give examples from different industries, even e-commerce for that matter. I think the one big change or one big difference that I see between, say, an FMCG and some of the industries like, say, sports, content, and e-commerce is the campaign durations. For example, most FMCG campaigns will run almost throughout the year. You're almost on a slow burn. For example, if I'm selling UP noodles or a brand of biscuits, you want to be on air for a certain number of weeks during the entire year. Whereas if you are promoting, say, a big sale, or if I'm promoting a particular tournament, that's going to happen during a particular period. So you will run a campaign which is for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but that has to be very sharply focused. It has to be very impactful because whatever you have to do has to be over before that particular date. What you do after that doesn't make a difference. So accordingly, your planning changes. Accordingly, the kind of media plans you will make will change. Accordingly, I think the project timelines are very, very different and very, very dynamic. I would say in, say, in e-commerce or in the media, the timelines are extremely, extremely stringent because if something has to happen on a certain date, it has to happen. You can't change that, right? So I think those kind of changes, those kind of nuances will always be there. But I think at the end of the day, certain fundamentals about project management, media planning, dealing with multiple stakeholders, they will remain the same irrespective of which industry you're working.
When you were talking about products, like as in Disney stars, so there the product is not tangible in a way, right? So and in FMCG you worked with products, right? The traditional way of marketing and brand management. So how does that change? As in also, you said something about, that you would not be able to, I mean, it's unpredictable because obviously, you don't know how many people, I mean, how many cricketers have lost their wickets. So how does that change the brand management aspect in that? As in, if the openers are out, does that change something and you guys have to do something with the ads, and what exactly is that?
So let me put it this way. I think, see, in any, and I'm going to use the word category management here instead of product or brand. When you're handling a particular category as a brand manager, I think there could be some things which are relatively short-term in nature, whereas something which is a long-term in nature. Now, when you are handling a product, whether it's a noodles brand or a snacks brand or a biscuits brand, obviously the product is in your control. You can make certain changes. For example, your product formulation. You think you get a feedback about certain product, maybe not up to the mark. You can make changes, or you think if you do this product can be better than competition. You can make those tweaks to your product because that's something that is very much in your control. As part of the FMCG business, changes in your packaging, changes in the grammage. You only had a 70-gram product, now you have a 60-gram product because you want to be more profitable. Those changes are obviously very easy to do and also something which is within your purview.
Okay.
When it comes to content, you cannot change too many things because I think, and I'm speaking more from the lens of sports because that's something that I've handled.
Yes. If you can also take examples for that.
Yeah. So as I
I
said, if for example, for any particular tournament, there will be a schedule of 70 odd matches spread over 2 months. I'm giving the example of IPL. Now, once the schedule is out, you cannot change that schedule, right? You know that a certain match is going to happen on a certain day. Or again, once the match has started, what you can control is the pre-show content that goes into it. So you can, pull people in. But once the match starts, then the content takes over. There is very little that you can do to control it.
Okay.
So I think that's the one difference. Now that's why I said those changes will be there from a category to category. But if I look at it from a slightly long-term perspective, I think every brand or every category wants to grow. Right? And I think from that perspective, I would say things do not change much. To give an example, at the end of the day, when I'm making a 3-year plan for any category, the intention is to make sure that the category grows, or at least you grow within the category. Right? So if I am working on a brand, which is say a kid specific brand, you will always work on certain long-term projects to make sure that your brand stays relevant within that TG and your consumption within that TG grows.
Okay.
Now, if I'm today handling, say, entertainment, I'm working in sports. That point of view still remains the same. I look at it and say that, India, while Indians love sport or cricket or whatever it is, you still want them to watch more cricket. You still want, especially the young ones, the kids, to get into the category, right?
Okay.
And then them becoming fans of the sport, fans of the cricket. And again, you will work on certain long-term projects, irrespective of whether a tournament is on or not. Pull them in. You may want to reach out to them in schools. You may want to do shows which are beyond cricket. You may want to do a specific feed, which is the tonality of which is very kid-centric, right?
Okay.
When you watch a cricket match, you will see a lot of serious commentary. But what if I make a dedicated feed, which is a lot more light-hearted in nature, which also educates kids about, what different cricket terms are? That could be a long-term thing which brings in new users or new viewers into the category. So there will be some short-term goals. So for a brand, whether it's an FMCG brand, sometimes you want to run a campaign just to make sure that people get the message that, hey, you've launched a new product. Right. Or, hey, I have reduced the price point. Or, hey, I have running a consumer program. Or, hey, a tournament is on. But I think at the end of the day, irrespective of which brand or category you're handling, you will always have the long-term goal to make sure that your consumers keep coming into the category, category in your brand grows. And I think that, irrespective of which category or brand you're handling, that will remain a constant.
Okay. Okay. And here, when you were talking about content in media industry, so what all are you also talking about, like brand management as the role of the brand manager is also to handle content for the events that might be taking place while a sporting activity, say for that matter IPL, before, after events, advertisements, everything together?
It depends. And I think the thing is, with something like sport, you also have multiple stakeholders in play. Because, for example, if it's a cricket tournament, the respective cricket boards also have a point of view, and they would also like things to be done in a certain way. So I think the many stakeholders. Again, I think generally when it comes to the content part of it, that is something which is handled by experts or the content guys, because they know how to manage these things. But because you are the function which is dealing with the consumer or understands the consumer better, you will always give in certain inputs to make sure that those nuances are added. So I think when it comes to content planning or whatever, obviously it's the content team, the producers who work on certain shows, etc. They're the experts. But you will be inputting into what should be done or how it can be done if you are dealing with certain consumer set.
Okay. So now, if you can just tell us the roles and responsibilities of a brand manager. This of course, overall, right from FMCG to any media industry or any industry for that matter. The generic uh, roles and responsibilities that are there for a brand manager.
There's something that I mentioned earlier. I
Hmm.
think it's something that my boss had told me the first day I
Okay.
moved into a brand. The two things that he said to me. One is that the fact is that a lot of us, when we move into brands, it's driven by the fact that we have seen a lot of cool, fancy advertisements when we were kids.
Yeah.
And at least in our heads, advertising is equal to marketing. A lot of people. And I'll not shy away from accepting that.
Right.
Even
Yeah.
probably I had that point of view when I moved in.
Yeah.
But the fact is that in most industries, businesses, and categories, advertising is a part of the overall thing that you do. It could be a very small part of it at times.
Okay.
And there is a lot of operational stuff that goes behind getting things done.
Okay.
So that's the first thing he told me, that there is a lot of fancy stuff that you will do, but there is also a lot of generic operational stuff that you'll do, and that's what a brand manager does.
Okay.
And secondly, and more importantly, always look at your role as a project manager, something that I mentioned earlier, because what is expected of a brand manager is that he is that one guy, or he or she is that one person centrally who is coordinating with all the functions and making sure that everything related to the brand or the product is moving smoothly as per the timelines. That is your key job or key role. So I'll give you the example of the two industries that I've operated in. If I look at FMCG, for example, as I said, you have to deal with multiple stakeholders. If you're selling a pack of noodles, you have to deal with the manufacturing guys. You need to understand what is the lead time for the product to be made, to be shipped to the market, etc., etc. You also have very fancy packaging, which has the communication of your brand, but also the mandatory information that should go as per the rules of the food safety norms or whatever, whether all those things are in place or not. When you're making the media plans or the communication plans, you're dealing with the media agency. What should be the plan, how it should be done, when it should be delivered. Everything has a lead time involved, right? Because they have to speak to certain people, book the time slots on various media vehicles.
Okay.
You have to work with the creative agency, right? What is the kind of communication you want, and how many languages do you want it? There are multiple iterations because the creative process will always take time, right? We'll go through multiple scripts. You may also want to test some of those scripts and concepts with the consumers before you make the final film. There is a research aspect of it. From time to time, you would like to meet the consumers, reach out to the consumers just to understand what they think about your brand or the category or in general, right? There could be many reasons why you want to speak with the consumers, but you do that. So there are many stakeholders and you're dealing with all of them. And as I said, every project will have certain timelines associated with it. To give another example from FMCG, I'll come to media after that. I think there are a lot of new products that are launched every year. And I think invariably at some point in time, you will deal with the launch of a new product. Now that involves many, many steps. And I think by the time that you think I want to launch a new product, to the time that it actually goes to the market, it can take anywhere between 12 to 24 months. Because again, you work with the product guys to work on the product. They will make multiple iterations of the same product. Then you will take it to research possibly with the consumers. Then you find out, okay, these products I think are working better than the others. Then you probably think of, okay, how do I position it in the market? What should be the branding on the packet of it when I launch it? You may again want to do a consumer research. Spend some time on what
this is a role that so the brand manager has to coordinate through all this or work through. So has to be in touch with the sales department and
yes. If you're handling that brand, ultimately you're going to be the brand manager for that new product or the new brand, right? So if you are joining at a stage when it's starting from scratch, you will go through everything, right? Sometimes you may come in between and you may not have seen the previous steps, but you'll still be responsible for everything else that follows. Right? So yeah, and then when you launch it, you will go with the sales guys to make a launch plan, which are the markets I should launch. So you're dealing with everybody. And which is why I said, from the time you think I want to launch a new product, the time it actually goes to the market, it could be anywhere between 12 to 24 months, depending on how many steps you add, how many times you want to do the consumer research, etc., etc. Now, similarly, if I go for my example, just to the media where I'm working right now. Again, I think we work very hard on tracking communication. If you are launching a new show or you want to promote a sports event, you want to understand what is the best possible positioning of that particular event or that content. You want to understand that, very sharply define your TG. You work on multiple concepts. Again, you do a research probably with the consumers, you do an internal debate, refine those concepts. Then you work with creative agencies, production houses to make the communication.
Right.
You work with the media agencies to make the plans, when do you want to start, etc., etc., and then deal with it. So there is a lot of operational work, there's a lot of execution work that happens, which involves multiple agencies and stakeholders. And yeah, handling that is, I think, especially in the initial years when you're doing brand marketing, is probably the most important part of your job, or is the key part of your job. Of course, as you move up the ladder, you get more involved into strategic decision making, what we should do, how we should do, where we should be 3 years from now, and if you have to be there 3 years from now, what we should do now, etc., etc. But those will happen at a slightly later stage. You start more with making sure that everything about your brand is operationally solid and is being done as per the timelines.
Okay. So now that you were talking about what you do in the initial phase of your career, and then so can you take us through where if someone is post MBA, if someone is in brand management, so from entry level to senior level, how do they progress? And first let's take this question.
So,
But post MBA, as an
so invariably, you will start with one brand or maybe two brands. If they're two smallish brands or one big brand, something like that, you will be responsible for that. As I was explaining earlier, handling the operations of it, managing the operations of it is a key part of it. Dealing with all the stakeholders. Over a period of time, as you get more experience, you'll get to lead a team possibly. You may have one or two people attached to you. And you move more into the decision making part of it, dealing more with the senior management, etc. And again, when you move up, you could be handling more than one brand, or multiple brands become a part of your portfolio, right? So to give an example, you may start off as the brand manager for within the noodles category. Maybe you say you have 3 or 4 brands or sub brands. You start with one of them. Over a period of time, you become the brand manager for the entire category. Over a period of time, you may be handling multiple categories, because what happens is that companies tend to structure certain brands in a certain way. It depends upon the organization. But say one organization says that I look at snacks and noodles as overall as part of snacking business, right? And therefore, that is how I want to position that as a portfolio. So you could be leading that portfolio, which is about the entire snacking business 10 years down the line. Just giving an example, right? Similarly, in the sports business, I may be starting within a particular sport, say cricket, and I'm responsible for marketing certain properties within the cricket portfolio. Then over a period of time, I may be managing the entire cricket portfolio. Over a period of time, I may be managing the entire sports portfolio that is with that particular channel or that particular media house. So that happens. You basically, the span increases, and obviously the team that you handle also increases. For the first 3 to 4 years, I think you should be mentally prepared that a lot of work that you will do will be the groundwork. You will be doing a lot of data analysis as well, by the way. You'll be doing a lot of data analysis. And I think that really helps, because that gives you an understanding of the category, of the business that you're into.
What exactly would that be for? As in,
it will essentially be as an input to what you want to do or how you want to make plans for your business, right?
Who is giving the data?
There are multiple sources for it. So I'll give an example. See, typically every business has an annual business plan, right? What you want to do next year. And I think the preparation of that takes 2 to 3 months. So you will set up certain targets for yourself, right? If my market share currently is X, I want to be 1.2x next year. If I'm currently selling 100 units, hypothetically, I want to sell 120 units next year, right? Now, this is what you want to do. How will you do it? Right? So you make a plan. You tell that I will do this from a sales perspective. These are the trade plans I make. From a communication perspective, this is what I do. from a new product launch perspective, I'll do this, and you make the plan. When you do that, you'll obviously get support from your internal data because you know your data, what's happening,
Correct.
how you've been doing.
Hmm.
External sources like Nielsen gives you the market share data
Okay.
of
Yeah.
not just, not just your data, but also of the overall industry. So you get an industry sizing, you get to know where your competitors are, in which markets they are doing well, where you are stronger at an overall level. You can also get household level data.
Okay.
Where are certain agencies who go to certain households uh, every month, and they can give you an insight into what is it that they're consuming, how much they are consuming, etc., etc. So you get these external agencies also, which give you a lot of information, and you obviously have your internal data, which is your sales data, etc., which are your inputs, and
Right.
that help you make a plan for the next year, and then you kind of get rolling.
Okay.
This is for FMCG. Similarly, for media also, right? Again, you will get some data about what is it that the consumers are watching, how much did they watch last year,
Okay.
if you want to increase viewership in a certain TG, what plans you would like to make. You will get some internal data, and you'll have got a lot of external agencies or vendors helping you with a lot of information.
Okay. So, for brand management, how much of sales experience is important to excel in brand management? As in, for FMCG, probably yes, you get a better understanding of the market, right? But
Yeah.
is it the same also for media industry or some other industries for that matter?
See, the way I see it, ultimately, you are running a business, right? You are responsible for a business. And the front end sales is a very important part of business. It always helps to have that point of view. As I said, there are people who start their career directly in brands, don't do a sales thing, and they have been doing very, very well in their careers, right?
Okay.
But what is important is that you develop that point of view, even if you have not done a sales thing, at least by doing field visits or by interacting with your friends and colleagues who are into sales, to understand that side of the business. Of course, as you said, FMCG is probably, I would say, a little more critical and important because that front end team uh, deals with the sales of a product on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And genuinely, sometimes the inputs that you get from the ground, from the front end team, can make a big difference in making sure whether your product is a hit or not, or
Right.
whether things are moving in the right direction or not. Media, probably not as much. But again, as I said, that's a very important part of the business. You should understand uh, what your customers are feeling. What are they saying? What are their thought process? These are always good inputs to get, whether it is about, again, the category that you're handling or the campaign that you have done. It is my personal experience. I started my career with sales and then moved into marketing. I think that worked very, very well for me because
Okay.
by the time I got into marketing, I knew what happens on the ground actually. And therefore, when I was making certain decisions or making certain plans, I always had that lens in my head that, see, this may or may not work because this is what I've learned from the past. But again, there is no one way to it. I have also seen people who have started in marketing, never done sales, or maybe have done a sales team later in their career, but they have done very, very well. But if I have to just put it in one line, it always helps to have a point of view about what is happening on the ground, what your colleagues are saying, because at the end of the day, you're all part of the same business, right? At the end of the day, you're still trying to make sure that your brand does well and you get the sales numbers done.
Right.
And their inputs are important, and it's always good to have the point.
Okay. There's a question about does brand manager takes care of operational stuff? How much of operational stuff is there for a brand manager?
There is a lot of operational stuff. As I
Okay.
said, I think when you start your career, there will be a lot of operational stuff. The quantum and quantity of which will go down as you move up because you'll have a team who will take care of it. But there will be operations. And I think when I say operations, it's not that you have got to get involved into everything, but I think you should have an idea about how things are moving. For example, if the manufacturing guys are dealing with something, it's their job to deliver things, right? You are not expected to be a manufacturing expert, or you are expected to be a packaging expert. But what you should know is how is their work affecting my timelines, or if there are any issues there, how does it affect my immediate goals in terms of my supply chain, in terms of my sales, etc., etc. get an overall view of things. I think the expectation is, as I said again, make sure that your projects are moving smoothly,
Mm.
and which is why you have to coordinate with a lot of people. So your operational stuff means that you
Mm.
have to regularly have meetings with these people, understand if everything is going right. If things are not moving well, you have to escalate it to people, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah, I think as you move up, as you spend more time, and the operational stuff will obviously get lesser. And again, I think it's a good thing that in the early years you get your hands dirty, because the
Yeah.
more you are hands-on with the operations, much easier it becomes for you later on to deal with the bigger challenges.
Okay. Okay. Let's talk about the skill sets that are necessary to excel in this field. So, say three hard skills and three soft skills. That and if you don't have those skills, is there a way for one to develop them? So yeah, first the skill sets. Oh, what's the basic necessity one must have?
Uh, See, I think even if you are working in individual capacity, I think
Yeah.
I've already mentioned this multiple times during this conversation.
Hmm.
You will be working with many stakeholders at the same time, right?
Right. Hmm.
So I think how well do you work with teams, and it's not just about leading teams, but working with multiple teams,
So
is
communication.
communication is important. Of course,
Yeah.
it's very important, but I think it's also about dealing with multiple stakeholders.
Okay. So dealing with
Uh,
different people,
because
different
see,
departments. Okay.
yes, because I think the point is, all the stakeholders will have a very different and a very specific point of view about what they do and what they bring to the business, right?
Right. Hmm.
And it's not always easy to appreciate that. It is not always easy to put yourself in the other person's feet and say, okay, he may be struggling because of
Hmm.
X, Y, Z
Hmm.
reasons, right?
Hmm.
So I think, which is why I think the more you are able to understand the operational aspects of it in the earlier years, it becomes easier to understand and appreciate why certain
Okay.
things are a challenge or not. So it is
Hmm.
not just about communication, but just making sure that you're able to collaborate with different people at different
Okay.
points in time. See,
So collaboration is one
yeah,
skill that
uh,
one must have.
I
Okay.
think increasingly, I remember this something that again, my boss said to me, and I
Hmm.
think some of those things make a lot of sense when you grow older. He
Yeah.
said, we are moving from a time when it is not just a people oriented skill, but it is also a data oriented skill, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So while people management will always be a critical part of it,
Hmm.
today you have got access to hundreds of data points, which is probably not the case 10-15 years back.
Correct. Yeah.
Today, if I'm working in media, I can get data about how many minutes a particular viewer watched a show, what time did he log in, what time did he log out. Similarly, in FMCG, you've got many data points, internal, external, about sales, consumer behavior, etc., etc. And there's too much data, actually. There's a lot of data.
Yeah.
The important thing is to make sense of the data. We
Hmm.
often felt that we are doing too much of analysis, but we don't have actionables to it. But I think the important part of a brand manager is to make sense of that data. You will get data from hundreds of sources,
Hmm.
but what is the actionable that you can derive out of it? So
Okay.
increasingly making sense of the data analysis
Hmm.
is important. I think again, something that my boss said, I keep going back to him.
Hmm.
A good brand manager is someone who will combine logic with creativity. It's unique in that sense, because unlike some of the other roles or functions like say a finance or an
Hmm.
operations,
Hmm.
marketing does allow you to be creative. You are
Okay.
expected to be creative at times, right? Especially when you're dealing with communication and things like that.
Hmm.
But at the same time, what your business goals are.
Hmm.
There is a lot of data that is going into a decision making, into setting up your goals. So think of it from both the lenses. I think data analysis is increasingly becoming very, very important. And that
Okay.
doesn't mean that you have to become an expert in data, but what it means is that when you're thrown with 10 or 15 or 20 data points, what are the key points that you pick up from that?
Okay.
What are the actionables that you pick up from that? That becomes a critical aspect of it.
Okay.
You're not expected to become a data expert necessarily,
Hmm.
but you have to start making sense of the data. So I think data analysis, data
Good
interpretation,
data
I think these
analysis.
are very important.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think that to be a successful brand manager, you have to be very, very creative. I don't think that's
A
necessary.
lot of people think that brand management is kind of, because a lot of people think that there is an overlap between advertising and brand management because the ads are coming up and all that. So yeah, people think that you need to be really creative
No,
in brand
see,
management.
it helps if you're
Okay.
creative, but I don't necessarily think that you have to be
Okay.
very, very creative, because see, at the
Okay.
end of the day, you will work with creative partners and creative agencies who are experts in that.
Right.
What actually matters is your ability to uh, decide what works the best for your category, for your business, and for your consumer.
Okay.
Sometimes when you're very creative, it can also have an impact where you can be very strongly attached to whatever you suggest, or whatever your idea is, but that need not necessarily be the best thing for your brand or for your business
Okay.
or for your consumer. So I
Mm-hmm.
think you also need to keep a very practical lens and say, hey, this may sound very cool, but it will not work. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
uh, we were working on a consumer promotion plan for one of our brands, and this is, I think, a few years back, and I think the agency came back with an idea that we should give away OTT subscription packs as a consumer promo. It sounds very cool, but we should not forget, and I'm again talking about 4 or 5 years back when OTT was still very new in India, right? And I am selling a brand which a lot of which goes to rural markets, a lot of which goes to smaller towns, right? It was not the right time to try something like that. Okay.
Okay.
I think keeping your own biases away and trying to think from the consumer's lens is probably one of the most important things you have to do as a brand manager, right?
Okay. Okay.
You may be watching the Netflixes of the world. You may not be consuming television, right?
Yeah.
But your core TG may be doing that, right?
Okay.
Which is why interacting with the consumers on a daily basis and keeping that lens that this is what my consumer wants, or this is what works for him or her, that is a lens that you should always keep.
Okay.
It is difficult over a period of time because we are all human beings. We tend to bring in our own biases. But that's the one thing a brand manager should always guard against. Which is why I think one other skill I would always say is be very open-minded. Don't allow your own biases to come in and creep in and affect your thought process. It always helps to have as many interactions with your core TG, with your consumers as much as possible, just to understand what they're doing, what they're thinking, and all.
Yeah.
Keeping your biases away and the ability to listen very carefully and keep the consumer's insight in your head is very, very critical from a marketing, from a brand manager's perspective.
Okay. So basically, a lot of skills that you actually spoke about, apart from data interpretation, a lot is actually more people oriented, market oriented, as in looking outside for information and all that, and working with those things, right? And things must be changing a lot, right? Very drastically, especially in, I think now with, as you said, in e-commerce and media, things change faster than probably in FMCG. FMCG probably things are more like, maybe there is a festival and then, things are working differently because, obviously, you have to, like, if it's in North India, then obviously for Diwali, if it's South, then maybe some other festival.
See, I believe that every business goes through certain changes. FMCG is probably a very established business.
Right. Yeah, it has been
So
there.
certain fundamentals are there which are very, very strong, which will not change overnight, or even if they change, they will change so gradually that you will not realize that. But at the same time, every business goes through changes, and you'll have to live with that. For example, as I said, you get a lot of data now, so you have to make a lot of sense of the data.
Correct.
I think one thing that even the FMCG industries are dealing with is how the media mix has changed. So I think increasingly there is a focus on digital. There's increasingly also a focus on making sure that your presence and your brand awareness on e-commerce platforms or on new forms of channel distribution are very, very strong, because ultimately that's where the consumers are coming and buying your products. So those challenges will keep cropping up in every industry, and you'll have to deal with that. What has been your focus, say, 3 years back, may not be the same now because of how the entire thing has changed. So those things will continue to happen. Maybe a little more in certain industries, but they will continue to be there everywhere.
Okay. Yeah, let's take a few questions. if I'm selecting operations management specialization, could I see my future in brand management?
You can. See, what typically happens in these schools in India is within the first year itself, even before you have decided what specialization you want to take, you have the summer internship that happens, right? And I think that itself gives you a view of what you can possibly do once you move into a corporate world post your MBA. A lot of people are able to crack a PPO or a PPI, replacement interview, or offer immediately during the internship itself. If not, then in the finals, when you already have a specialization in place, you can take a call. I have seen people who have moved to sales and marketing from an operations background, even if their specialization is operations. But having said that, I think generally when you are appearing for your interviews, especially during the final placements, the expectation is that even if you have not majored in marketing, you should have at least have a mind in marketing. It's an expectation. Again, I'm not going to say that is absolutely mandatory, but more often than not, there is an expectation that if you have at least in a minor in marketing, it means that you had some inclination towards that function. So yeah, but I have seen people from operations move to marketing as well.
Basically, it might be a little difficult for them to convince the person, the recruiter.
Yeah, and see what also happens is sometimes when you move to an organization and maybe you've done very well there, and you say now I want to do something else. Then if you've been a good performer, the company would obviously try to retain you and make sure that you're also happy as an employee and you're growing as an individual. And then you can switch functions. So from operations, maybe you get into the sales and marketing things. That happens. I have seen that happen. That happens. But yeah, I mean, then you also need to perform well, and you also need to convince people that you're good enough to do that kind of work.
What are the software skills required for a brand manager? Do you need any software skills?
You will work a lot on Excel. You will work a lot on Excel. And of course, PowerPoint. I think you'll make a lot of presentations and you'll deal with a lot of data. So it always helps if you are good with Excel. Increasingly, and again, I've seen this. I think a lot of people who come in these days are not just good with Excel, they're very quick at making dashboards and things like that. Because the thing is, as more data comes into your job, how you're able to make sense of it and how you're able to structure it is probably the first key task. So I think to start with, Excel and presentations are the two things we'll need a lot. And again, this is a very dynamic thing. 3 years from now, you'll have something else coming up and have to work on that.
After specialization in marketing, can we apply for brand management? Probably what she meant is like, if you can directly be hired for brand management right after MBA.
See, what essentially happens is when you're recruited from a B school, companies will tell you it's either a sales or a marketing role, right? And then you go through a management training program or some kind of training, etc. And then you're put into certain roles. So as I said, a lot of people start with sales and then move into marketing, but a lot of people directly start with the marketing, right? But again, when you're starting with it, you will essentially start at a assistant brand manager level or a brand executive level, which is again working with a lot of data, dealing with a lot of operations, dealing with a lot of stakeholders. And then you slowly move into what is genuinely brand management or being a brand custodian and all that. So that is something you should be prepared for. But yeah, there are people who start with a brand role straight away. Now, on what basis that decision is made, I can't tell that because that's how the companies do. But yeah, I think there are people who start directly with brands as well.
What are the what are the kind of profiles that usually a recruiter is looking for when they come for these, for placements in campuses? And is it, of course, if they're from the marketing, they're from brand marketing and all that. But what are the right now, if we have, say, our attendees are mostly going to be taking CAT this year or next year. So obviously for this year, people are more focused right now on CAT prep. But for the people, for 2023, they have still time to build up their profile. for the same. So if they already know that, yes, they want to get into marketing and probably brand marketing and probably in sports industry. So do you have any, what are the talking points that they can probably start working on right now on their profile?
See, I think the one very good thing now, and this is not something that was as prevalent back in 2012, 2013 when I was appearing, is that you have a lot of online courses now, right?
Okay.
Plethora of online courses are available across the Udemy's and the Coursera's. So there is absolutely no harm in picking up some of those courses. In fact, while you're doing those courses, you'll also understand whether you genuinely like this or not, because some people may realize this is not working for me. Right?
Correct.
But I think you've got many options. You do some of those courses, you can always put them in your CV. It again tells the recruiter that this person has made an effort to understand the function.
Correct.
And understand the nuances of it. Because again, I think in B school, just to give a perspective, recruitment happens in two stages. One is the summers and one is the finals.
Right.
When you appear for your summers, you've hardly 2 or 3 months into your B school. So there's not much that you can do in that 3-month period. You can do a few things, but that's not going to make a substantial difference. So what you have done before that, which is you do some courses, do some workshops, those are the kind of things that you can at least show in your CV that this is what
Do you
I've
think
done.
internship of some kind, like maybe in sales and marketing? I mean, if I mean, for sales, I'm sure they might be able to get some internship.
If you can do an internship, great.
Yeah.
But my experience is that it's not always that easy to get a very good internship opportunity. You may get something. I'm not saying you can't, but internship opportunities are relatively limited before your MBA for a marketing role. For a sales, you may still have it, but for marketing, not so much. But again, those things are also changing. We've got a lot of new agencies starting up, especially in the social media space. You can get an opportunity. And if you can, great, because that again shows in your CV that you have made an effort. Correct. So workshops, courses, internships, very, very good before your summers. I think by the if when it comes to the finals, which is in the second year of your B school, towards the later half of it, then I think what matters is what you have done during your summer internship, what you have done in the B school. Those things then start playing a more important role. To give an example, I think when I appeared for my finals, the fact that I had done my internship in Britannia, which was an FMCG company, and it was a marketing role, I think that made a big difference. Right. So I think you also have to approach it from that perspective. I think when you're applying for your summers versus when you're applying for your finals, there is a difference of that 1 year that you will be spent. And how you have utilized that 1 year and what has happened that 1 year makes a far bigger difference. Prior to that, there are a few things that you can do. There's courses, internships, workshops, and you have a lot of online workshops also happening these days. You just have to keep your eyes and ears open.
So while you were talking about skills that are important for a brand manager to have, what if someone is already got into a good B school and everything, but they're not naturally people person, or for that matter, they're not inclined towards working with huge teams or coordinating amongst different departments, like the creative department, sales, and this and that, and category managers and all that, handling so many people from different walks. What I mean, is it something like is it then a limited scope for them in brand management, or is there a way for them to improve themselves, or is it like with experience all these things, these skills comes in, or I mean, as they will progress in the field? How does it work?
There are two parts to it. I do not think that you have to be a people person to be successful. That's not the expectation. In fact, sometimes if you're a people person, it may be very difficult for you to say no to people, and you'll have to do that a lot when you're in marketing. You have to say no to a lot of people. I think more than that, it's important that what people in different functions do. What are their challenges? How are they managing their job? And how is it impacting your job and the business? If you understand that or appreciate that, the conversations become a lot easier. And then you can, just understand what needs to be said when, what needs to be done. So obviously, some of it is also part of experience. As you spend more time in the role, you will learn that. So I don't think that's something somebody should be worried about. And again, you do not need to be a people person per se to be successful here. I think it's just important to understand what the different functions are doing. If you're able to understand that, then you'll be able to manage things well.
Okay. How much of finance knowledge is required for a brand manager?
See, I wouldn't say finance as such, but I think you need to know your numbers. Okay,
Right.
there's a difference between the two of it, because when you're a brand manager, you will be dealing with a lot of things like market share, a lot of data points that have in Nielsen, which is weighted distribution, share among handlers. If you come to media, you will deal with TV ratings, time spent by viewer, reach. You will have a lot of numbers to deal with, right? And you have to be decent with those numbers. You need to know the key numbers with respect to your brand, your category, your competition. What are the key numbers that you're tracking? How can you make a difference to those numbers?
Correct.
That you have to deal with. You don't have to deal with the finance related numbers. Finance also comes into picture, especially I think because at some point in time, every brand or category needs to be profitable or making business. So you need to get that sense, but that will happen. And I think that is not that tricky. But you will deal with a lot of numbers with respect to your category and brand. You should be thorough with it. That is important.
Okay. So, how smooth was the transition for you from FMCG industry, wherein you worked for a pretty long time, and then to a media industry? What were the pitfalls or the challenges or the difference between these two? And was it a smooth transition?
See, I think it wasn't very difficult to be honest. But there were a couple of things as well. I think I made my switch at a time when the COVID pandemic hit.
Okay.
So it was a very weird time to make that switch. I mean, it was not planned that way. So what also did was that I got a lot of time to get into the role, because immediately after things were shut down, I got more time than normally people get to get into my role. So that kind of worked in my favor, if I could say that. The other thing is that I had bosses and managers who had worked in the FMCG business before. So I think they kind of prepped me up very well for that role. And I think that made things a little easier for me. I think when you switch an industry, it takes a little bit of a time. I think the one big realization that I had was media is a very fast-paced environment compared to FMCG. FMCG itself is fast, but media is at a different pace, and e-commerce is at a different pace, because you're getting data on an hourly basis, on a daily basis. You are planning for things which have to happen on a certain day. You cannot move it. Tomorrow, if I'm launching an FMCG product and I go back to my boss and say, there is some issue, we will not be able to do it today, but next week, you will probably get away with that conversation. But you will not get away with that conversation in an e-commerce company or in a media business, right? Timelines are absolutely sacrosanct. So the pace at which things happen in a media or e-commerce is very different, which is why the coordination between teams has to be absolutely spot on. And again, I think as you move from one industry to another, I'm sure there are other nuances that come into picture. But yeah, so it takes some time. You have to understand the business. It takes some time, but certain fundamentals, as I said, remain the same. Irrespective of where you go, you'll have to work with multiple stakeholders. You will be working as a project manager. But at the pace at which things happen will vary from industry to industry.
What's the typical day for a brand manager? You can take maybe from your media experience.
So typically, we will have a meeting or two to start with, where we're essentially looking at what stage various projects are. What are the things that need to be dealt with more urgently? What are the other things which are more long-term in nature? So you generally start with the meeting with your key stakeholders just to get a hang of things. You will have a lot of interactions with your creative partners, with your media agency partners. These are the people with whom you work almost on a regular basis, right? Because these are the people who are responsible for executing your creative campaigns and your media campaigns. So you work a lot with them. Within the media space, you also work a lot with the content team. Just to clarify a little bit what the content team does, they are the ones who are responsible for developing the feed that you watch on your TV screens or your mobile screens.
Okay.
And it is not just the live match, but also what happens before the match or after the match. It's a pre-show or a post-show.
Okay.
And of course, when you're working for a channel, it's not always about the live sports, but also a lot of other programming that we do, right?
Okay.
When a live sport is not on, you still have a lot of shows that keep running, right? So you work with the content team to understand what is the plan for this month or next month, and then accordingly you take a call what needs to be marketed, promoted, how it needs to be done, etc., etc.
Yeah.
You have to kind of prioritize things within your entire content calendar, that this is the big thing, this needs to be promoted, it needs at least 10 days, 12 days of airtime, etc., etc. So you do that plan. So you have a lot of interactions with the content team as well. From time to time, you'll also have meetings with stakeholders in the sales team and the revenue team, because they will also be driving certain objectives which are critical to the business, and you may have to support them in that. So again, to give you an example, they may come back and say that for us this year, UP is a very important market. And we are just doing certain things to drive our business in UP, get more clients from UP, drive our distribution in UP. So we want you to, help us with ideas or help us with certain plan, which helps us deliver that in that particular market. So you also work on certain short-term tactical projects from time to time like that.
Okay.
But in one word, you do a lot of things.
Yeah.
Daily.
Before we wrap up, do you have anything to say as in a suggestion or two to give our MBA aspirants? And also, if you have 1, 2, or 3 books to tell about, as in, anybody, who is interested in brand management, are there any books that you would tell them to read now, which would probably help them in understanding?
See, I think right now, from a preparation point of view, I think everybody has their own way of preparing and understanding things. And I think over a period of time, you also do a self-analysis and understand what are the things that you need to work upon. Right? So I think, for example, I felt that beyond what you read, taking tests on a regular basis in a timed environment is what makes a big difference. So I used to do a lot of that, especially in the last 4, 5, 6 months. Take as many tests as possible in a timed environment, because that's what is important.
Correct.
And I think from the preparation of GDPI, I mean, today again, newsletters have become very common. They were not so common back in 2011, 12. But now newsletters are very common, and I'm a big fan of them. So, it just gives you a quick glimpse of what's going on, and then you can obviously do your own research to read about it. If you are interested in certain categories of businesses, FMCG, for example, you will find a lot of reports that the consulting firms keep coming up with, the PwCs and the KPMGs. And I think those are good reports to refer to, because they give you good talking points when you're going for a GD or a PI. And they also give you a bit of a perspective and insight about that industry or that business, right?
Yeah.
So from time to time, maybe over the weekends, when you get some time, try to read some of those reports. They're very helpful. So I think do some of those basics. As far as books are concerned, see, honestly, I also feel that some of these things help you to navigate a conversation during an interview, right? I always like reading books, but I think I've also made it a point at times to mention certain things, because I thought I'm comfortable talking about it, and maybe it will lead to a conversation which gives me a few brownie points. So I generally like reading non-fiction and all. And I think some of these books that I'm going to talk about are also very easy to read, fun to read. So I am a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell's books.
Yeah.
All of them actually. So I'll not say any particular, but yeah, playing most recently in David and Goliath. I like all these books. From a marketing perspective, there are a couple of books that I really like. There's this book called Made to Stick.
Okay.
It is, I won't even call it a book about marketing, but just gives you a few very good examples, anecdotes, frameworks, etc., that you can keep in mind. I'm recently reading a book called The Content Trap, which is a lot about if you're interested in media or how there is so much of content around us these days. If you're interested in reading about things like that, then it's a very good book to read.
Okay.
And there is one book that I'll definitely recommend to a lot of people, because it's one of the best books I've read in recent times, is Factfulness. Again, it's a very simple, it's a very simple book, but I think it basically gives you a lot of statistical data points to make a
Okay.
point that, again, if you look at data carefully, there are a lot of interesting insights that can come out of it. So simple books to read. I don't think they're very complicated, but they give you a lot of insights, good anecdotes, and maybe a few good talking points when you're preparing for your interview.
Okay, that's all we have time for. Thank you all the attendees, and thank you so much, Dhruba Jyoti Chatterjee, for the insights that you presented for brand management, as well as for books and things to do to improve the profiles for the MBA aspirants. Thank you so much.